So I think we're just about to start this seminar here, and I welcome you everyone joining us here at the theater or watching us live on web. The video recording will be posted online with Swedish subtitles in due course. Those of you in the audience who are on social media are welcome to share your thoughts using the hashtag Kulturklyftan, KULTURKLYFTAN, Kulturklyftan. That's a tricky word in Swedish anyway. So, warmly welcome to this seminar on Swedish culture policy with a Nordic-Baltic outlook and commentary from some of the key players charged with implementing cultural policy in their respective countries. My name is Benny Marcel, and I'm the director of the Nordic Culture Fund, and I will moderate this discussion. But let me first of all start by introducing the panel. And first here is Staffan Forssell, who's the Director General for the Swedish Arts Council and the host for this meeting. And then we have Paula Tuovinen, who's the Director of the Arts Promotion Center in Finland. And then there is Annette Österby, who is the head of division of Agency for Culture and Palaces in Denmark. And then there is Daina Urbanavicina, who is the chair of the Lithuanian Council of Culture. And then it's Ola Kjellgren, who is the director of the Nordic Culture Point. And finally, it's Christine Danielsen, who is the director of the Arts Council in Norway. Give a big hand. And I'm Benny Marcel, as I said, and I'm the director of the Nordic Culture Fund based in Copenhagen, but here today. The backdrop to this seminar is a debate on cultural policy that has been raging in the Swedish media about state control and the boundaries between fairness, quality, and artistic freedom. Some people say that culture in Sweden is clearly under greater state control than in the other Nordic countries. But is that really the case? What constitutes inappropriate interference and what constitutes perfectly legitimate funding requirements when the tax money is involved? As part of the Swedish presidency of the Nordic Council during 2018, Staffan Forssell decided that he will gather this group of people here in Almedalen. And you have invited us all here, the Nordic and the Baltic colleagues, to join you here today for a conversation about artistic freedom and the similarities and differences in the debates on these issues in the Nordic countries. So Staffan, I will actually give you the floor now to open up the debate. You're given 5 minutes to give your views, and how do you deal with the question of state control?
Thank you, Benny. So this is a very sincere topic, so I will actually use my cards in English here and to follow my script. Dear madams and sirs, today we ask the question if Swedish culture policy is a role model or a warning example. For me, the answer is clear. I would present our culture policy as a role model to any other person or country. As far as I know, few, if any other countries base their culture policies as clearly as the freedom of speech as we do. Our culture policy states that culture should be a challenging force, inviting the arts to be critical. It spells out the independence of culture. The Swedish Arts Council promotes freedom of expression, artistic quality and development. To do this, we also need to promote equality and prevent hate, threats and discrimination. This is why the debate in the Swedish media the past months seems so absurd. Do we have state control within the cultural politics, limiting artistic freedom? I say no. On the contrary, our culture policy is based on fundamental democratic values. Freedom of expression is absolutely central and goes back to the Swedish Constitution. The Constitution also secures that equals worth of all and the liberty and dignity of the individual. One of the opening paragraphs of our Constitution states that the public institution shall promote the opportunity to all attain participation and equality in society, and for the rights for the child to be safeguarded. The public institution shall combat discrimination. When it comes to political control, in all my years as head of various cultural agencies, I have not once experienced political interference in artistic content. But it's always important to review ourselves, and I'm therefore glad there's a debate about cultural politics that pushes for artistic freedom. But we are not at that alarming point of that debate has presented. In worst case, the debate can cause us to question the whole system of public funding. And I'm sure that we need cultural politics and public funding. In a democratic society, many different perspectives and diversity of voices must be heard. And one way of promoting this is state funding for culture. In a democratic society, we need to make sure there is money to make possible options that are not shared by everyone. Children and young people who do not have parents with culture capital must also have the opportunity to experience literature, art and culture, and meet other ways of looking at the world. To make this happen, the Swedish Art Council supports a free and accessible cultural life all over the country. To be sure that its funding is far from political control, we have a system with 15 expert groups that evaluate applications. And those experts are often artists themselves, and they work for 4 years at the most. Then new experts come in, and quality is the core of these evaluations. So far, Swedish political parties have supported state funding for culture. Large investments have been made in culture, and this has promoted both artistic freedom and artistic development. But we should not forget that promoting artistic and freedom also includes those who do not have direct access to culture. And the greatest challenge for the Swedish Arts Council is that we must make sure that everyone can access the arts and culture, and that every individual has an equal opportunity to develop their artistic abilities. Therefore, the purpose of some of our grants is to make sure that independent, high-quality art and culture is practiced by and enjoyed by more people. We need to direct funds to reach more inhabitants. And I'm glad we are taking new step in this direction. This year we got a new mission, promoting culture schools for children and also large fundings for new libraries. New fundings for libraries. I'm sure this investment will help the arts and culture reach new audiences. I look forward to the unexplored artistic expression of those who have not had access to this area before. I cannot imagine the content, and I would hate to influence it. But I do believe that our current culture policy and recent investment will help this happen. Freedom of expression and equal rights are two sides of the same coin. Our democratic values, it's reassuring that both are protected by our Constitution. Salman Rushdie has said that 2 things form an open society: freedom of expression and rule of law. If you don't have those things, you don't have a free country. Thank you.
Thank you, Staffan. I will now give the panel an opportunity to give their perspectives, and afterwards we will have a dialogue with you. So you better prepare your questions or statements where you are right now. So in 20 minutes it will be you that will be the persons who who asks or makes statements about this issue. And I prepared the panel actually by sending some emails, and now it's examined, so we'll see what happens. So I will give you, the panel, a maximum of 5 minutes, to talk about the issue of state control as it relates to your work. Is Sweden a model to emulate or a cause for concern? What is the situation in your country? What are the conditions like for art and culture in the area you work in? Is any of your own work on art or culture relevant to the question of state control, or does any of it exemplify the opportunities for and barriers to art expressing things that cannot be expressed in other ways? Freedom of speech and artistic freedom cannot always be taken for granted in the Nordic region. Are we credible when we talk about these issues? What barriers do we face? See, there are many questions. Do you have any good examples of freedom of expression in culture being of great importance to your countries and regions? And I was actually thinking about who will start and so on, but I think I will start with you, Paula. You are new in your post, on your post in Finland. So give your perspective, 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. First of all, I would like to say that I feel really uncomfortable between these two tables because I'm so small, and this kind of restricts me, so this is a structural problem.
Yes!
I have two hats. I'm a performing artist, I'm a dancer, choreographer. I have been dancer choreographer for nearly 40 years. And on the other hand, at the moment, and during the last 12 years, I have been in leading positions in the organizations and administration. I still perform. So as an artist in Finland, I have never felt any pressure from any political party or any person, any politician. So I have really felt that I have I'm really free. I have a free expression. I can do whatever I like if I have the resources. So I think in Finland we have quite a good situation in that sense. And then we have the small groups, artist groups. I think they have the same situation. They are really free. They have a free, they can do free will, they can do whatever they like if they have the resources, if they have a place, rehearsal space, if they have money to pay salaries for other artists. Everything is possible in that sense. But what is restricting artists is more like the education and the other artists. If you are working with other artists, you are collaborating, and then you are negotiating all the time what is. So you're not free in that sense, that you negotiate. What do we want to express? But also there is a so-called unconscious curriculum in the education. So that restricts artist expression. So how to be a good artist? What kind of how do you have to behave? What kind of clothes do you have? And everything is kind of unconscious, and that restricts. But no politicians. I don't think there are politicians who are saying what to do and how to work. But then, if we look at the things from the perspective of organizations, bigger organizations, in Finland we have a big problem that we have big institutions who get the biggest money, and then we have a very, very well-educated freelance scene that don't have really resources or not enough resources. There's a big gap between these two groups. So if we look at these bigger institutions, then there have to be political supervising or directing. There have to be criteria why the public money goes to these big organizations. At the moment, we don't have it. So I would say it should be the opposite, that the state and the ministry should have a criteria, a clear criteria, whereas now at the moment there's only how many persons you are paying salary. That's the only kind of criteria, how much money you get. But there should be a quality criteria. There should be a social impact criteria. There should be maybe certain kind of how could I say, kind of national. There are certain national organizations like National Theatre, National Opera. They need maybe a bit more money. Now it's maybe even too much money, but they need a bit more money maybe because of a certain historical background. But there should be a clear criteria that is the same for all organizations, or for groups that have 5 persons or National Opera. They should have some kind of a same kind of a criteria how to divide the money, so that the ministry could have some directing. For example, if there is these equality problems or diversity problems, or so there have to be some kind of political direction. I think but it's strategic level, and it doesn't go to the actual artwork.
Thank you, Paula Tuovinen.
Thanks.
And then we will move on. This is like the Eurovision Song Contest, from Finland to Denmark and to Annette Österby. What is your perspective on the issue?
Well, I'm not going to ask or answer all your questions, maybe because that would take too long time. But
You're excused.
What I'm going to do is to describe the situation in Denmark between arts funding and political steering. And I will also address the pros and cons of the Danish situation. And I will end by answering the question, is Sweden a model or a case for concern? But I'll start by just shortly introducing where I'm talking from. I'm responsible for the Danish Arts Foundation, which is a traditional arm's-length body for the state funding. And our annual budget is a little more than 500 million Danish kroner. And it goes on the basis of applications to institutions, to projects, and to artists. We are regulated by law, and it says in the law that the primary criteria for support is artistic quality. That's it. But it also says in the law that we have to report annually on the spread of the support with regards to gender, with regards to geography and age. But that's all. So in a way, we are very lightly steered. And I think it's very typical of the Danish cultural policy that these reports on the spread is a kind of self-regulatory tool, that it aims at creating awareness more than sort of hard steering. And when I look back, I can see that's very typical of Danish cultural policy. There's still a great deal of respect for the arm's length principle and also for the autonomy of the cultural institutions. And when the government or the Minister of Culture has specific agendas, it is done using soft power with instruments such as recommendations, benchmarking, best case, inspirational report, etc., and not direct regulations or directives. Which means that in Denmark, the government's possibilities of directing or enforcing specific agendas or policies in the cultural field is quite difficult. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of that situation? Well, on the one hand, we have a very high degree of artistic freedom and a sense that freedom of speech is an essential value in society. On the other hand, on the flip side, you could say that in many ways Denmark are lacking behind with regards to some of the other Nordic countries, with regards to gender equality, or with regards to diversity in the arts. And this has some consequences, because it does make the Danish support system seen, at least by some, as elitist. Not everyone feels that art and culture is accessible for them. And that again affects the political backing. We are, in a way, lacking political ownership. And also we can see that cultural policy is a low priority across the political spectrum. We also see declining cultural budgets, and has for the last 8 years at least. So, at the moment we're actually questioning ourselves if the arm's length has become too long. Is the distance between the politicians and art and culture too great? And by that I can end by answering your question. Is Sweden a model or a case for concern? I think from a Danish perspective, we can be inspired by looking to Sweden and Norway to find forms such as you have kulturmeldingen in Norway, and you have regleringsbrevet. You have some kind of formats, a negotiating space between the arts funding system, the arm's length, and the political system, where you can discuss and also define how art and culture can play a role in dealing with societal issues.
Thank you, Annette. Lithuania, Daina Urbanavicini. The perspective from your country, from Lithuania.
So many questions in 5 minutes, but I will try to be very short.
You're welcome.
So I'm very happy to be here to take part in such important event in Sweden. So thank you very much for the invitation. So to begin with what's going in Lithuania, the main thing that Lithuanian Council for Culture was established not so long ago, 5 years ago, it was in 2013, and is still undergoing the process of development. We tried to see what would be better model to create this new institution, and we decided that the best way to reform our post-Soviet culture funding system in Lithuania, it's the model of Nordic Arts Council. And based on Swedish model, we, Lithuanian Council for Culture, protect the principle of arm's length from politics in culture field. And we also regard quality as the most important selections principle when choosing members of the working groups of experts. They are responsible on making funding recommendations to the members' council, who make the decisions on grants for arts and culture. We also hold transparency essential, and in the same way as our Swedish colleagues, we regularly publish a list of the projects that have received grants, so that anyone who concerned can judge for themselves whether the grants are contributing to the development of the Lithuanian arts and culture. Talking about freedom of expression in Lithuania, this issue for the most part of the 20th century, since it was non-existent. After a long term of the state censorship by Tsar Russia and a short period of freedom of expression in the early 20s, authoritarian right-wing censorship was implemented in 1926. Furthermore, when the totalitarian Soviet censorship took over in 1940, it was the end of any freedom of speech and, of course, of expression for the following 50 years in Lithuania. It was not so good situation. And now our art historians and theorists are now studying the so-called Aesopian language developed by the Lithuanian artists and are raising questions about the possibility of freedom under severe state censorship. What is the reason we rarely take the freedom of expression for granted? And perhaps this is why the current authorities honor the distance between states and arts. Today in Lithuania, censorship of any kind is banned by the Constitution of the Republic of Lithuania. Of course, with some exceptions for material qualified as provocation of internal strife. That is why the control of the artistic process is not and cannot be a part of the cultural policy in Lithuania. However, freedom of expression and the need to have some boundaries remains an ongoing debate in our mainly Catholic society. I can see several examples. For example, 6 years ago, a performance by the Italian director Romeo Castellucci on the concept of the face regarding the Son of God in Vilnius, Lithuania, raised a very sharp and very shame public debate, and after pressure of some religious and cultural groups, was even discussed in a session of the parliament. Subsequently, there were protests against showing the performance. It was not so good situation. Another example, this year, our Lithuanian fashion designer, Robertas Kalinkinas, won the case, the European Court of Human Rights, after the officials of Lithuania banned his 2012 ad campaign portraying a denim-clad Jesus for offending public morals. So to summarize, debates on freedom of expression in Lithuania are mostly raised by the conservative part of the society and are pushing the authorities to take an action and not vice versa. In terms of our council, in theory, of course, there is always a possibility of political control regarding the state funding, because they like to say, our money we give you. However, practice of the past 28 years in Lithuania proves that it's highly unlikely. In the past few years, we were approached by several media representatives, and in some cases by local politicians, regarding the contents of the projects funded by our council, of course, mostly regarding the religious and moral basis. And each and every case, we stand firm on the position that the Lithuanian Council for Culture does not impose any kind of restrictions on the contents of the projects that we recommended for funding by the experts. And as I already have mentioned, we regard quality as the most important selection principle in culture funding, and we regard freedom of expression vital in order to ensure the quality. It's the main thing in Lithuania from our council perspective.
Thank you, Dina. And Ola Kjellgren, Director of the Nordic Culture Point, from the Nordic perspective. What could you say?
Thank you very much. I will start with...
I think there is something to the microphone.
I think mine was number 6, was it?
Yeah, I think
Number 6?
Number 6, please.
Okay. You better... Yeah.
Is this better? No?
No.
Okay, thanks. I picked some of the questions to make a comment on that, and the first one is Sweden a model to emulate or a cause for concern. I would say today that I don't see any causes for concern, although that might change, of course, with the coming elections in Sweden this autumn. But I would also like to say that this goes for the national level. There are risks, as far as I can see, on the regional and local levels, since the arm's length principle is not that strong, according to my own experiences. That goes without saying. It seems to be a point of view among some politicians. And I think that's, there are strong risks connected to such a statement. I believe that the arm's length principle is something really valuable that, of course, should be discussed and evaluated and clarified and defined every now and then. When it comes to conditions in the area that I'm working in, I'm running a cultural institution that's run and owned by the Nordic Council of Ministers in Copenhagen. Our main task is to administer grant programs, the ministers' grants programs, and I would like to say that the conditions at the moment are really good for art and culture when it comes to Nordic cooperation. We have clear and well-defined criteria of what kind of projects are to be supported, criteria that are confirmed by the ministers and or the staff from the national ministers of culture. We also have very experienced expert groups from the Nordic regions, in some cases also including the Baltic countries, since one of our programs is the Nordic-Baltic Mobility Program for Culture. These independent experts are appointed for a maximum of 3 years, and they are sovereign in making their own decisions on which project to be granted or not granted. The experts come from the culture field themselves. They have different but long-time experiences, and together they work out a good practice during their mandate period. This also makes the working environment for my own staff very secure, since they only have to make decisions on so-called administrative decisions. They have no saying about quality and so on in the actual projects. That's up to the experts to evaluate and decide. We receive about 700 applications a year, of which about 20% are granted at a sum of 5 million euros on an annual basis. There's one question here of barriers to art expressing things that cannot be expressed in other ways, and as far as I can see it at the moment, the so-called controversial art or statements wouldn't have any problems from my perspective to be granted by our funds or programs. And then there was a question of freedom of speech and artistic freedom, and of course we can't take that for granted, but are we saying too much when we emphasize that in the Nordic countries? And I think that we are quite credible, more or less, at least compared to other countries. Although there are, when it comes to artistic freedom of expression, there are a lot of threats to artists that have made their statements, which is, they are by law entitled to say whatever, but there are threats, and especially in social media and so on, and we shouldn't forget what that implies. And I also think at the moment there's some kind of fear saying or doing the wrong things in the public debate at the moment. People watch each other, and one wants to make a really quick statement on social medias, and then you have to be sure that that statement lasts when more facts come around, so to say. Finally, do you have any good examples of freedom of expression in culture? And I think it's worth mentioning the efforts especially made by the Nordic countries in creating safe cities for artists at risk, that is, artists that are threatened in their home countries for what they are saying and doing. So that is my view. Thanks.
Thank you, Ola. Kristin Danielsen from Norway, director of this Norwegian Arts Council. What is your perspective, and would you like to summarize also the panel? Feel free, you've got 7 minutes.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm not very happy about the Eurovision Song Contest comparison, because Norway always comes last.
Okay, sorry.
Just wanted to see if you were still awake. I want to answer maybe just one of your questions, because I think my colleagues have brilliantly expressed how the arts councils are built. We are in Norway very much shaped, the Arts Council of Norway is very much shaped after the image of the Arts Council of England. Actually, 2 of the founding fathers of the Arts Council of Norway, they stayed in London during the war, and they were very much inspired by the arm's length principle that you've heard quite a few times already. And this actually comes from the Arts Council of England's father, who is John Maynard Keynes. Not everybody knows that, but he's the one who established the Arts Council of England. And he used to say, God help the politician who meddles with the arts. And that's actually quite wise, because the arts has a very strong will of its own, and that's the whole point. Whereas the politics also is will, isn't it? So it could be a dramatic mismatch. And I've been following the discussion in Sweden very closely, and I think there are so many similar links between our countries, and I want to share some examples from Norway, because I think it is slightly different there at the moment, and then it may change, who knows. The Arts Council of Norway was established in 1965. We were established to take care of Norwegian literature, the Norwegian language. We actually put a tax on glossy magazines so that the low literature should fund the high literature. It's actually what it said. It started with a fund of 6 million kroners. Today we are 1.3 billion kroners. So it's becoming a large fund, but it's the origin, it was 25% of the entire cultural budget. Today it's 8% of the entire cultural budget. So when it comes to instructing the fund, there is a law, which I know is also the case in many other countries, and the law says that the ministry or the government is not allowed to meddle with decisions made by the council. And obviously laws can be walked around, we know that, but I feel that the arm's length principle in Norway is quite holy and has been since its inception. Just one example, in 2014, it was 200 years since Norway had its first constitution, and that was obviously would be celebrated. And the then Minister for Culture said in her grant letter to large institutions, she said in one sentence, "I would like you to celebrate the anniversary." One sentence. And that was upheaval. It was a total upheaval in the Norwegian culture sector because we would not be steered in that way. So I feel that the opposition against political steering is quite strong. Also, last autumn there was an attempt to change artists' unions' decision on setting up committees who will distribute grants. There are 28 committees distributing grants, and they are all artists. So the former Minister for Cultural Affairs tried to change that, and that ended up with a demonstration in front of the National Assembly, and artists wearing the Munch screen. So I feel that there is a pressure from the grassroots which is quite strong in Norway. Whether it is because we're a young nation, I'm not sure. But I feel that this grassroots pressure is also something that's different in 2018 compared to 1965. When we're going to write the history on 2018, we're going to remember the Me Too campaign. We're going to remember fantastic Pride celebrations this year and this week and last. And we're going to remember big revolts actually starting on social media. And running a public agency in that time and age means that you always have pressure, political pressure and intentions, but the pressure is even stronger from the bottom up. So what used to be a top-down system is also now a bottom-up system. And we keep saying at the Arts Council of Norway, which I know a lot of other arts institutions say, is that we're not about something, we are for somebody. Which means that when we create our services, we are using UX design, and you all know that is user experience design. You know, we are for our users. And I think that perspective is kind of lacking in the Swedish debate, because obviously politicians will want to, you know, they all have their babies, they all want their babies to grow in their politics, but it's very, very difficult to actually do that. Because of the arm's length principle, because of the structures that my colleagues have been talking about with peer-to-peer artist assessment, and because of the pressure from the grassroots. So I think that's a different section. Also in Norway we measured, because we talk about freedom of speech, and in Scandinavia that's a bit like brushing in open doors, isn't it? We all agree. I mean, you will find very few people saying that I'm very much against freedom of speech. But how about artistic freedom? And like you mentioned, do artists feel that they can say and do and create whatever they want? And there's a private charity in Norway called Fritt Ord, the free word. They actually measured the artist's own assessment of their artistic freedom. And we came out pretty good. And one of the reasons is that they can actually influence the way money are distributed. The peer-to-peer evaluation at the Arts Council and the grant-giving committees and the scholarships. So as long as the structures can be kept, I feel that we are quite safe. But it will always be dependent on political situations. My question is, or my worry, is that it's a long time since 1965 when they established these funds. I keep wondering, would that be possible today? You know, after September here in Sweden, would it be possible to establish, if we did not have the Arts Council today? Can you see that that would happen in 2018? I'm not so sure. So we need to keep fighting for these principles in shifting political times. At the moment, we have a new culture minister in Norway, and in the platform that the Liberals have, together with the government, they say that arts and culture is a powerful individual tool, building stones in society. And they are very much occupied with quality. So I feel that's a reassurance at the moment in Norway, because if we talk about individual building stones and not instruments to make you healthy or sing and dance or whatever the bonuses of arts can be, that would always be a bonus, something added, whereas arts and culture policy is about quality and enhance of critical thinking, and that's more than enough.
Thank you, Christine, and it's just fantastic to hear all these perspectives. And we got the feedback from the audience, and I would like now to open up the discussion for you to either make a statement or to make your perspectives to the panel, or just to make it here. I think that is part of freedom of expressions and artistic freedom as well. There might be anyone who would like to perform something. Staffan, yes?
Actually, in a way, I will ask myself.
Yes.
Sometimes, you know, it's like throwing a ball to a dog. We're all running after the ball.
Yeah.
Is this the real question to discuss 2018?
Oops.
So someone, we are so emerged about this question, and this is an important question, we no doubt. But sometimes I ask myself, we have quite, in a way, a conservative system who has been given money before should be given once again. Is this the way we should divide the money of culture in the future as well? And sometimes I believe that is the most important question. And that is much tougher discussion, because in reality, as Christine said, we more or less agree on this. So I wouldn't say that the question we came here for, it's important, but sometimes you wonder yourself, why are we debating that and not the big issue?
Well, we better ask the host, I think. But could we open up for a discussion or questions or statements? Is there anyone who would like to take the opportunity? We do have some key players here, and we do have a question, or we might shift it to another question. Is there anyone? Oh, I know it's also very difficult to stand here and to wait for anyone to perform. Is there any questions? No. So I might stay, they do have respect for this. And I was thinking about, when you are explaining these things and we hear that, what to say, what to answer, I mean, it sounds like perfect. Are you the political instrument for this issue, or this question? Or if you had another situation, I mean, we have two dancers, professional dancers. You were here in the audience. What should you have? What could be the point from that perspective, Christine?
I think that's a good question, and obviously listening to ourselves, we can sort of easily list up how we're built and the wonderful principle and how we work and so on. What I think is that we are also appointed, all of us.
Yes.
We are appointed by the government, which means that we have a huge
or the king.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's actually true in Norway. The thing is that there's a huge responsibility lying on these positions, and that's why we have them only for a limited time, which is a good thing. But we have instruments measuring our work again. But I think the best thing is always to ask the artists. And that's what I like about the survey that Fritt Ord did. Because when we answer critique in the newspaper, we just list up how we work. And obviously, nothing is perfect. Distributing public money, the perfect system does not exist. I think the system of peer-to-peer evaluation in the arts is as close to as possible, but it's always down to individual committees and how they rule. And that's where the actual power lies. You know, the discussions in the committees. And I've been watching them really closely. And the good thing is that there's more than one. Because in Norway, 75% do not get funding. Because the amounts are so many. I guess it's more, I don't know the percentage, we can talk about that. It's actually quite interesting. Which means at all times, 75% of the artistic community is actually quite pissed off with the Arts Council because they do not get funding. But that also means that committees they have a really hard job deciding. And they're usually between 5 and 7 people, so it becomes a collective discussion. And I think that's the best criteria. That you have to not just defend what you think is artistically the best piece of work, but you have to make the rest of the group agree with you.
Yeah. Paula, you were thinking about these committees when we had a lunch earlier today. What is your opinion about what you're thinking about the
we have also the peer review system. So there are many councils that are mainly they're artists, some experts also, but mainly artists who are deciding about the grants. And it has also some problems. The system has some problems because also the artists, they basically know everyone, or they know their own circles. So that's also not always the best way to divide the grants. So there are also problems in the system.
But you will start up reform.
Yeah, I would like to at least to make also here to professionalize the evaluation process, so that the criteria should be clear and open to everyone, to all applicants, that they know why through which criteria the application process is done, and also that the process itself have to be open, or have to be everyone have to know who is working with the applications and who is doing what at which point.
Staffan Forssell and then the audience.
Yes, and knowledge information which I think is quite important. In Sweden, we speak about Sweden. Approximately 70% of the budget of culture in Sweden lies not within the state. It lies within the municipalities and the regions. And when we're here at Almedalen, we always only speak about the state. But the real power, as Ola mentioned, is out in the regions. The Swedish state stands for approximately 30%. And we can influence to some extent, but look at the numbers.
So who are you?
Many thanks, Fred. It's Martin Gilbert, British Council.
Yes, hello.
Hello. So it's a great, very, very interesting discussion, and I'm particularly interested in the topic, or what you're discussing about inclusion. So the opposite side of inclusion is exclusion. Now, I'd like to sort of, I know that in the UK this is a big issue, and we're working towards more inclusion. And I'd really like to hear how you see it in a couple of years' time in your countries and in your organisations. What steps you're taking to increase inclusion, and what is inclusion?
Annette.
Oh, inclusion of who? Because we discuss it a lot in the Arts Foundation, but it has a lot of parameters, and at the moment there is a strong, I think you have the same in Great Britain, this pressure towards regionalism, and this is on the top of our agenda at the moment. It's about geographical inclusion, to really make sure that the funds is diffused geographically in a geographical balance. And we're looking at the dark spots on the map. And 2 weeks ago we did a journey, and we went around talking to those municipalities that do not receive a lot of funding, to have a direct dialogue with them. What can we do to increase the numbers that meet art and culture in this local area? And what was interesting about their reply was often it's not only money that they want, it's knowledge, it's help persuading the politicians about the role of culture. It's very much about the educational level in schools and kindergartens. How can we be more professional in the introductions we give to young children into arts? It's very difficult if you're in a small place. So in that respect, we're working very directly with the geographical inclusion. I think in Denmark we're not doing so well on diversity. We don't really have tools or have not applied tools to work with it. We're talking very much about quality. Do we need to have a broader concept of quality in order to include more art forms, both to make sure that we include new expressions, like how do you work with Instagram? How do you what do people who are 15 or 16? What are their cultural habits? How do we include them? I think when we look upon ourselves, I think we see a very traditional arts funding system going back to 64, 65, and are we really sort of including new cultural patterns or expressions? So it's inclusion on a lot of, I don't know if you have a more specific question in your...
That's very clear answers, right?
Thank you, Annette. Another question or statement? Who are you?
Thank you. My name is Christian Schönenberger. I'm the ambassador of Switzerland in Sweden. And my question is how you deal with different ways of working. What I see in the Swiss Art Council is that frequently it's bottom-up, it's demand-driven. Artists make proposals, they are then considered or not considered. But the question is, how do you deal with sort of top-down initiatives? You want to promote a certain art form or so. How do you bring these two ways of promoting art together?
Christine grasped that point, right?
I think it's a very good question, and it's interesting because that's when you're a sort of a public agency, you need to do both. You need to let all the 1,000 flowers blossom so that you should have good grants so that the art sector is actually driving the development. But then again, as an arts council, you see the entire country under one, and we do a lot of interesting analysis. We have about 20,000 applications coming in each year. That's a lot of data. And we put that together, and then we see, ooh, there's a tendency there. Oh, and the performing arts, they do that. And then we want to do sector programs with initiatives, and that could be all sorts of different sector programs. And I can't mention them all here, but there needs to be a balance. There needs to be a balance of the Arts Council setting up sector programs that would look into certain areas, and then you have to have a lot of free distributed grants so that you make sure that the sector is actually driving its own development. So it needs to be a mix between the top-down and the bottom-up. But I think it's a very interesting question, and also answering from the Nordic. I'm also on the board of the Nordic Fund, and they have this really interesting three-step version where you have the start, sorry, what's it called again?
It's called Opstart.
Opstart, which is sort of seed money,
yes,
just to check out whether a project should go forward or not. Because the problem with a lot of the Arts Council is that you need to be ready to go right into production if you do get the funding. Yes. But a lot of projects maybe should never happen. So that seeding fund is really interesting. And then you have sort of regular project funding, and then you have sector programs, which is on collaboration between Nordic live music scenes, where we see a big tendency, and also on Norwegian handcrafts. So I think this three-step model is interesting. But there needs to be dynamics.
Yeah.
You can't be stuck.
Ola and then Staffan.
I would just like to make a comment on this diversity issue that the Nordic Ministers of Culture have allocated extra money for this year that we've been handing out for projects that are promoting diversity, accessibility and so on. And as sustainability also is a big issue, there are money put in that matter too when it comes to young people. So there is efforts being made, although there are small sum of money, but still there is a common an agreement on these issues that are important in the Nordic countries.
Yeah, thank you. I think there have been raised so many questions that might be new seminars, new questions for seminars, Staffan, but I would like you to end up this seminar because it's already, we are already there. It's 55 minutes. Panel, thank you. And Staffan.
Well, first I would say like the great question from England and Switzerland, because I think both are aiming at accounts maybe our biggest problem. diversity, we do not reach everyone. How should we reach them? So it's an ongoing problem. And we learned a lot from you. And we actually imported in creative places from England, which I think is a great idea you had. We can learn about that more. And then, in a way, there was a lot of criticism on projects this morning. I believe projects or seed money is a good way of trying new things. If we never allowed new things, new projects money coming up, then we will not see new things. So we have to trial and error, and that is not a problem. So in a way, and then actually will be a discussion at 4 o'clock maybe for the Swiss ambassador. I will be on a panel at 4 o'clock. You're invited to come. I doubt there will be so much public, so you're glad to come. Nevertheless, I think this is, I would say, thank you to all of you. Great colleagues of mine, and there are a lot of similarities, and there are some dissimilarities as well, and we learn from each other. And it's an ongoing discussion, and one of the things will happen is actually tomorrow. We have a keynote from England, Mrs. Sir Nicholas Sorota, addressing maybe some of the same problems and issues. And we also have a conference, the Nordic Council, the ministers of the Nordic countries arranging a conference in Malmö about safe havens in December. So you're all invited to that. And by that...
And before that, we are going to try and answer your question in Arendal, which is sort of the Norwegian copycat version of this week, Arendalsuka. You're all very welcome. Yes. And we're going to organize a seminar called From Sympathy to Quality, and it's all about inclusion. We have a long way to go. So
and
thank you for that question.
I'm moderating that discussion as well.
So you can see us all again in Arendal, my hometown.